Amir eased his car into the driveway, the hum of the engine fading as he turned the key. The late afternoon sun bathed the quiet suburban neighborhood in warm golden light, casting long shadows across neatly trimmed lawns. For a moment, he allowed himself to exhale. It had been a long day at work, another grueling investigation into police misconduct that left him mentally drained. He leaned back against the seat, letting his fingers tap idly on the steering wheel. But before he could fully relax, flashing red and blue lights erupted behind him. His stomach dropped. Amir glanced at the rearview mirror, watching two squad cars screech to a halt mere feet from his bumper. His pulse quickened, but he forced himself to remain calm. Not again, he thought bitterly, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The officer who approached was white, broad-shouldered, and carried an air of authority that felt less like protection and more like intimidation. Officer Kyle Brennan's hand hovered near his holster as he stopped beside Amir's window. "Step out of the vehicle," Brennan barked, his voice sharp enough to cut through steel. Amir hesitated for only a second before rolling down the window. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked evenly, though his heart pounded in his chest. "You fit the description of a suspect we've been looking for," Brennan replied, his tone dismissive. Amir frowned. "What description?" Brennan didn't answer directly. Instead, he leaned closer, peering into the car with narrowed eyes. "License and registration. Now." Amir reached slowly for his wallet, careful not to make any sudden movements. "I'm just coming home from work. I live here." He handed over his ID, watching as Brennan barely glanced at it before tossing it onto the hood of the car. "This is your house?" Brennan sneered, gesturing toward the modest home behind them. "Yes, it is," Amir said firmly. "And if you check my license, you'll see my address matches this location." Brennan ignored him, continuing his interrogation. "What do you do for work?" Amir clenched his jaw but kept his tone measured. "I'm an intelligence analyst with the FBI." For a split second, something flickered across Brennan's face. Doubt? Skepticism? But then it hardened again. "We'll see about that." The tension between them thickened, each word exchanged amplifying the weight of prejudice embedded in the interaction. Amir felt the familiar sting of being judged not by his actions or words but by the color of his skin. He swallowed hard, refusing to let frustration get the better of him. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into the glove compartment and pulled out his FBI badge. Time seemed to freeze as he held it up, the gleaming emblem catching the sunlight. Brennan froze mid-sentence, his smug superiority crumbling under the weight of what he saw. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he stammered, You didn't tell me you were FBI." Amir's expression remained stoic. "You didn't ask." Across the street, a neighbor stood on her porch, phone in hand, capturing every moment of the confrontation. She zoomed in as Amir revealed his badge, her hands trembling slightly. When the video hit social media hours later, it spread like wildfire. Hashtags like #BadgeOverBias and #JusticeForAmirCarter trended nationwide, sparking outrage and drawing attention to yet another instance of racial profiling. Support poured in from strangers who rallied around Amir, praising his composure and calling for accountability. But alongside the praise came threats, anonymous messages flooding his social media accounts, warning him to stay silent. One read simply, "Keep pushing, and you'll regret it." That night, Amir sat alone in his dimly lit living room, scrolling through the notifications on his phone. Each message sent a fresh wave of fear coursing through him, but beneath the fear burned a simmering anger. How many times would he, or others like him, have to endure this? Was pursuing justice worth risking everything? His mother, Ruth, entered the room quietly, her presence grounding him. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You're doing the right thing," she said softly, her voice steady despite the worry etched into her face. "I know, Mom," Amir replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "But sometimes, doing the right thing feels like standing on the edge of a cliff." Ruth knelt beside him, meeting his gaze. "Then hold tight to what you believe in. You've always been strong, Amir. Stronger than anyone I know. Don't let them take that away from you." Her words lingered in the air as Amir stared at the screen, weighing his options. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but deep down he also knew one thing for certain. Silence wasn't an option. Not anymore. Amir lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as the events of the day replayed in his mind like a broken record. The flashing lights, Officer Brennan's accusatory tone, the badge that silenced but didn't heal. Each moment felt heavier than the last. Sleep eluded him, his thoughts tangled with frustration and fear. He could hear his mother moving quietly in the kitchen downstairs, her soft footsteps a reminder she too was struggling to find peace. Ruth eventually appeared in his doorway, her silhouette framed by the dim hallway light. She carried a steaming cup of tea and set it on the nightstand beside him. "You can't carry this alone," she said gently, sitting on the edge of the bed. Her voice was steady, but Amir noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she smoothed the blanket over his legs. "I'm not sure I have a choice," Amir replied, his voice low and rough with exhaustion. "Every time I think about what happened, it's like I'm back there again." Ruth nodded, her eyes distant for a moment. "I know how that feels," she admitted. "When your grandfather Elijah was beaten for walking home late one night, we lived with that fear every single day. And when your father came back from Vietnam, they treated him like he didn't belong here, even though he'd fought for this country." She paused, taking a deep breath. "It's not fair, Amir, but you've always been strong. Stronger than any of us." Her words hung in the air, heavy yet comforting. Amir reached for the cup of tea, letting its warmth seep into his palms. For a brief moment, the room felt quieter, less suffocating. But outside their walls, whispers were spreading through the neighborhood. By morning, the story had taken on a life of its own. Some neighbors knocked on their door, offering support and sharing stories of their own encounters with bias. One woman left a handmade sign reading "Black Lives Matter" on their front porch. Others, however, avoided eye contact or crossed the street when they saw Amir outside. Rumors swirled. Some accused Amir of provoking the officers. Others speculated whether the viral video told the whole truth. The divide grew palpable, an invisible line splitting the community. At the town hall meeting later that week, tensions boiled over. Predominantly white residents filled one side of the room, their voices calm but firm as they called for peaceful dialogue and urged everyone to move forward together. On the other side, black families stood shoulder to shoulder, demanding accountability and justice for Amir, and for countless others who'd faced similar treatment. "This isn't just about one officer," a young woman named Tasha declared, her voice trembling with emotion. "This is about years of being targeted, harassed, and dismissed because of the color of our skin." A man seated near the front shot back, his tone dismissive. "But we don't even know the full story. Maybe things got blown out of proportion." The room erupted into chaos. Voices clashed, tempers flared, and soon accusations flew across the aisle. Longtime neighbors who had once shared backyard barbecues now stood face to face, shouting about whose side they should take. Chairs scraped against the floor as people moved closer to allies or farther from opponents. In the heat of the argument, someone accidentally knocked over a table, sending papers scattering. A vase shattered against the wall, its shards glittering under the fluorescent lights. Amir watched from the back of the room, his chest tight with disbelief. These were people he'd known his entire life. People he'd waved to on morning jogs, borrowed sugar from, laughed with at block parties. Yet here they were, tearing each other apart over something far bigger than any one incident. As the meeting dissolved into shouts and tears, Amir stepped outside for air. The cool evening breeze did little to ease the weight pressing down on him. He leaned against the building, closing his eyes as fragments of conversations echoed in his ears. "It's not just about me," he muttered to himself, opening his eyes to stare at the stars. "This is about all of us." He thought about his grandfather Elijah, beaten for no reason other than the color of his skin. About his father, returning from war only to face hostility instead of gratitude. About the countless unnamed faces throughout history who had endured the same injustices. This wasn't just his fight, it was theirs too. And as painful as it was to watch his community fracture, he realized it was also an opportunity. A chance to confront the wounds that had festered for generations and begin healing them. Amir straightened, resolve hardening within him. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't let fear or division silence him. Not anymore. Amir sat on the porch steps, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the yard. The air was still, save for the occasional chirp of birds and the distant hum of traffic. In his hands, he held an old photograph, crinkled at the edges, its colors faded but familiar. It showed a younger version of his grandfather Elijah, standing tall despite the weariness etched into his face. Amir traced the outline of the figure with his thumb, feeling the weight of history press down on him. Elijah's story had been passed down like a family heirloom, told in hushed tones during gatherings or quiet moments like this one. He remembered his grandmother's voice trembling as she recounted how Elijah had been beaten by officers in the 1960s, for no reason other than walking home late at night. "They didn't even ask questions," she'd said once, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Just swung their batons and left him there, bleeding on the sidewalk." The image of his grandfather lingered in Amir's mind, merging with flashes of his own encounter with Officer Brennan. The parallels were impossible to ignore. His chest tightened as he thought about how little had changed over the decades. What must it have felt like for Elijah to be targeted simply because of who he was? And now, here Amir was, grappling with the same kind of injustice, though dressed in different clothes and happening under slightly brighter streetlights. His thoughts drifted further back, to another chapter of his family's history. This time, it wasn't Elijah but his father, Daniel. Through fragmented memories and stories shared reluctantly by relatives, Amir pieced together the life Daniel had returned to after serving in Vietnam. There were no parades or thank you letters waiting for him when he came home. Only unemployment lines and suspicious glances from local police. "Why do they keep pulling me over?" Daniel had asked one evening, frustration lacing his words as he sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands. Amir had been just a boy then, watching silently as his father's shoulders sagged under the burden of constant scrutiny. He remembered the anger simmering beneath Daniel's calm exterior, the way his knuckles whitened around the edge of the table. Those experiences had planted seeds of distrust in Amir's heart long before he ever encountered Officer Brennan. Now, sitting alone on the porch, those stories intertwined in his mind like roots digging deeper into soil. Each memory revealed another layer of pain, another scar left behind by systemic racism. It wasn't just about him, it never had been. His fight was part of something much larger, a legacy shaped by generations of struggle. The realization both terrified and empowered him. If he gave up now, what message would that send to those who came before him? To those who would come after? Later that evening, Amir met Marcus at a small cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of town. They often came here to talk about cases, injustices, hopes for change. But tonight felt heavier somehow. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something softer, almost hesitant. "There's something I need to tell you," Marcus began, his voice barely above a whisper. When Amir raised an eyebrow, urging him to continue, Marcus exhaled sharply. "It's about my uncle. You know how I've always talked about reforming the system? About holding bad cops accountable?" Amir nodded slowly, unsure where this was going. Well, Marcus hesitated again, rubbing the back of his neck. Turns out my uncle used to be one of them, part of a unit that framed innocent black men back in the 90s. I didn't find out until recently, and honestly, it's been eating me alive. The revelation hit Amir like a punch to the gut. He stared at Marcus, searching for some sign that this was a joke, but all he saw was guilt and vulnerability. Why are you telling me this now? Amir finally managed, his voice tight. Because I trust you, Marcus replied earnestly. And because if we're going to make real change, we can't hide from the truth, even when it hurts. Amir looked away, his thoughts swirling. How could he reconcile Marcus's activism with this dark piece of his family's past? Was Marcus truly committed to justice, or was he blinded by loyalty to someone who represented everything they were fighting against? Doubt crept in, gnawing at the edges of his resolve. Who else might be hiding secrets? Who else might not fully understand or worse, intentionally ignore the complexity of the issue? As the night wore on, Amir found himself replaying Marcus's words over and over in his head. Trust, truth, accountability, they sounded so simple yet felt impossibly complicated. He realized that the road ahead wouldn't just be about confronting external enemies like Officer Brennan. It would also mean navigating the gray areas within his own circle. Allies weren't perfect, and neither was he. But maybe that was the point. Maybe true progress requires embracing imperfection while refusing to settle for anything less than justice. By the time Amir got home, exhaustion weighed heavily on his body. Yet, as he climbed into bed, a flicker of determination remained. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new doubts, new battles to fight. But for now, he allowed himself to rest, knowing that even amidst uncertainty, he was part of something bigger, a legacy of resilience, courage, and hope. Amir sat at a small cafe table, his fingers tracing the rim of a coffee cup that had long gone cold. Across from him, Sarah Lynn leaned forward, her sharp eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made Amir feel both seen and understood. She was a civil rights attorney known for her relentless pursuit of justice, and though they'd only just met, Amir already sensed she carried the kind of conviction he needed right now. "We can't let this slide," Sarah said firmly, her voice cutting through the low hum of conversation around them. "What happened to you isn't just about one bad cop. It's about exposing a system that allows people like Brennan to act without consequence." Amir nodded slowly, his jaw tightening as he thought back to the confrontation with Officer Brennan. The memory still burned fresh in his mind. The dismissive tone, the flash of disbelief when he revealed his FBI badge. He wanted accountability not just for himself, but for everyone who'd faced similar treatment. Still, doubt lingered at the edges of his resolve. Could they really take on something so massive? "I know," Amir replied finally, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "But where do we even start?" Sarah smiled faintly, pulling out a legal pad and flipping it open. "We start by filing a formal complaint. Make it official. Then we gather evidence, everything from police reports to witness statements. We'll need numbers too, stories from others who've been targeted. That's how we build a case strong enough to demand answers." Her confidence was contagious, and for the first time since the incident, Amir felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. Together, they spent hours mapping out their strategy, brainstorming ways to hold not just Officer Brennan accountable, but the entire department complicit in systemic racism. By the time they left the cafe, the plan felt tangible, real, a spark waiting to catch fire. Over the next few days, Amir threw himself into building alliances. He reached out to community leaders, activists, and organizations, each meeting filling him with renewed determination. At a local church basement, he stood before a group of passionate residents, sharing his story and urging them to join the fight. "This isn't just my battle," he told them, his voice resonating with quiet strength. "It's ours. Together, we have the power to make change, to show that silence isn't an option anymore." The room erupted in applause, hands raised in solidarity. For every skeptic or critic outside these walls, there were 10 more willing to stand with him. Grassroots organizers promised to spread the word. Pastors pledged to use their pulpits to amplify the cause. Slowly but surely, momentum began to build, voices uniting under a shared goal: justice. But just as things seemed to be falling into place, a chilling discovery sent Amir reeling. Late one evening, while reviewing documents related to his case, he stumbled upon an encrypted email thread between someone in his own department and higher-ups within the FBI. His stomach sank as he read line after line detailing leaks meant to discredit him. Information planted strategically to paint him as unstable, vindictive, untrustworthy. The sender's name hit him like a punch to the gut. Marcus Chen, a fellow agent he'd considered a friend, someone he'd trusted implicitly. Amir stared at the screen, his chest tightening as betrayal clawed its way up his throat. How could Marcus do this? Hadn't they both sworn to uphold justice? He called Sarah immediately, pacing his living room as he explained what he'd found. Her response was calm but firm. "This changes nothing," she said. "If anything, it proves how desperate they are to protect themselves. You're onto something big, Amir. Don't let this shake you." But it did shake him. Deeply. Every interaction replayed in his mind now, scrutinized for hidden motives. Who else might be working against him? Who else might pretend to support the cause while secretly undermining it? Paranoia crept in, whispering doubts he couldn't silence. One night, unable to sleep, Amir found himself standing on his porch, staring out at the darkened street. The weight of everything pressed down on him. The risks, the sacrifices, the constant questioning of who to trust. Yet even in the depths of uncertainty, he wasn't alone. Sarah checked in daily, offering guidance and reassurance. Activists from the coalition sent messages of encouragement, reminding him why they were fighting. Standing there, Amir realized something crucial. Resilience wasn't about never feeling afraid. It was about moving forward anyway. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, yes, but together they could weather them. Hope, fragile yet persistent, bloomed again in his heart. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Amir stepped back inside. There was work to do, and for the first time in days he felt ready to face it. Amir sat at a cluttered desk in Sarah's dimly lit office, the faint glow of a desk lamp casting long shadows across stacks of papers and files. Each document told a story. Some whispered quietly, others screamed accusations, but all pointed to a system riddled with cracks. Together, they pored over years of police reports, scrutinizing every line for inconsistencies or red flags. Body cam footage played on a laptop screen nearby, grainy images flickering silently as Amir paused occasionally to jot down notes. "This is it?" Sarah murmured, her voice low but sharp as she held up a civilian complaint form dated 5 years ago. Same officer, same allegations. Nothing was done. Amir leaned closer, his jaw tightening as he read the details. The pattern was unmistakable now. Accusation after accusation, dismissed without consequence. Officers accused of racial profiling walked away unscathed, while victims were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered dignity. With each new discovery, the weight of what they were uncovering settled heavier on Amir's shoulders. It wasn't just about Officer Brennan anymore. It was about exposing an entire culture of impunity that had festered unchecked for decades. As hours turned into days, the evidence grew more damning. Buried deep within archived records, they found something even more explosive. Memos from senior officials explicitly instructing subordinates to suppress complaints against certain officers. One email stood out. A curt directive ordering the dismissal of multiple accusations against a high-ranking lieutenant implicated in several misconduct cases. The language was clinical, detached, as if human lives were mere inconveniences to be swept under the rug. Sarah slammed the paper down on the table, her hands trembling with barely contained rage. "This isn't negligence," she said through gritted teeth. "This is deliberate." They've been covering this up for years. Amir felt sick to his stomach. His worst fears had materialized before his eyes. Corruption wasn't just a flaw in the system. It was its very foundation. The realization hardened his resolve but also made him acutely aware of the danger they were in. If these documents got out, heads would roll, and not just those of the guilty. People in power didn't give up control easily, and Amir knew they wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone threatening their carefully constructed facade. The risks became impossible to ignore when anonymous messages began flooding Sarah's phone and email. Cryptic warnings urged them to drop the case, while others outright threatened retaliation. One message read simply, "Asterisk, you're playing with fire." Asterisk. Amir noticed how Sarah hesitated less when locking her office door at night, how she double-checked the car before getting in. Even their late-night strategy sessions carried an air of paranoia, every creak of the floorboards outside sending jolts of tension through the room. But despite the fear creeping around the edges of their work, solidarity kept them grounded. Activists from the coalition sent encouraging texts, offering resources and protection whenever possible. Community members volunteered to help organize rallies and fundraisers to support their efforts. When Amir felt overwhelmed, Sarah reminded him why they started this fight in the first place. "We're not doing this alone," she said one evening, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Every person who stands with us makes them weaker. Remember that." Her words steadied him, reigniting the spark of hope that sometimes flickered under the weight of everything they faced. As dawn broke over the city skyline, painting streaks of gold across the horizon, Amir looked at the mountain of evidence before them. They were targets now, yes, but they were also united. Together, they vowed to confront the truth head-on, no matter the cost. The courtroom was alive with energy, a restless hum of anticipation rippling through the rows of spectators. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, while cameras clicked softly in the background, capturing every movement. Amir sat stiffly beside Sarah, his hands clasped tightly together to hide their trembling. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the eyes of the nation watching, waiting for justice or another disappointment. Sarah leaned over slightly, her voice calm but firm. "Stay focused," she whispered. "This is where we make them listen." When the judge called for opening arguments, Sarah rose to her feet with an air of quiet authority. Her words cut through the tension like a blade, exposing the rot at the heart of the police department. She painted a vivid picture of systemic racism, weaving together years of evidence, racial profiling statistics, suppressed complaints, and deliberate cover-ups. Each sentence landed with precision, dismantling the defense's attempts to dismiss Amir's case as isolated or exaggerated. The defense lawyer countered fiercely, trying to cast doubt on Amir's credibility. "My client acted within protocol," he insisted, his tone sharp. "Mr. Carter's claims are speculative at best, a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by social media outrage." But even as the lawyer spoke, Amir noticed murmurs spreading among the crowd, whispers that betrayed skepticism about the defense's narrative. Then came the moment that shifted everything. Midway through the hearing, Sarah stood once more, this time holding up a document. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice steady but charged with purpose. "What you're about to hear goes beyond Officer Brennan. It implicates those who enable such misconduct to persist." She revealed the shocking connection. Officer Brennan's brother-in-law, a high-ranking official in the police union, had orchestrated multiple cover-ups of misconduct over the years. Gasps echoed through the courtroom, followed by furious muttering. Some jurors exchanged uneasy glances, while others scribbled furiously in their notebooks. The atmosphere shifted palpably, the air thick with disbelief and anger. Outside, the revelation ignited immediate protests. Dozens gathered on the courthouse steps, chanting slogans demanding accountability. Signs reading "No more cover UPS" and "Justice for all" swayed above the crowd. News vans lined the streets, broadcasting live updates as public outrage reached a fever pitch. Inside, the judge seemed acutely aware of the scrutiny, adjusting his glasses repeatedly as if stalling for time. Every decision he made would be dissected not just locally, but nationwide. As the trial wore on, Amir found himself retreating inward during brief lulls. He thought about the sleepless nights, the threats, the moments when self-doubt had nearly consumed him. Yet, amidst the personal toll, he realized something profound. His case had become more than his own fight. It was a symbol, a rallying cry, for everyone who'd ever been silenced, dismissed, or mistreated by those sworn to protect them. Sarah caught his eye briefly, offering a small, reassuring nod. In that moment, Amir felt a surge of courage. Whatever happened next, he knew he'd already sparked change. And sometimes that was enough to keep going. The courtroom fell silent as the foreman of the jury stood, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Guilty on charges of racial profiling and excessive force, he announced, each word landing with the weight of history. For a moment, there was only stunned silence. Then cheers erupted, filling the room with a cacophony of clapping, shouting, and tears. Supporters hugged one another tightly, their faces glowing with relief and vindication. But amidst the celebration, Amir remained still, his hands folded in his lap, his expression unreadable. The verdict was a victory, yes, but it felt bittersweet. As the noise swirled around him, he sat quietly, grappling with what this win truly meant. Was it justice? Or just a single step toward something larger? Outside the courthouse, the scene was chaotic yet electric. Jubilation clashed with frustration as crowds spilled onto the streets. On one side, supporters waved signs and chanted slogans, celebrating the guilty verdict as proof that accountability was possible. "This is just the beginning," someone shouted, their voice hoarse but triumphant. Yet not far away, critics argued that the decision didn't go far enough. "One bad cop doesn't fix the system," a young woman yelled into a megaphone. Her words met with nods from those who agreed. The stark divide underscored the complexities of achieving true change. While some saw hope in the verdict, others viewed it as merely scratching the surface of deeper systemic issues. Amidst the chaos, Amir slipped away to a quiet corner near the courthouse steps. He leaned against a railing, watching the crowd ebb and flow like waves crashing against a shore. Relief washed over him, but it was fleeting, replaced by an overwhelming sense of responsibility. This win wasn't just for him, it was for everyone who had ever been wronged by a system designed to protect only certain lives. And while today's verdict mattered, Amir knew it wouldn't dismantle centuries of inequality overnight. His fight wasn't done. If anything, it had grown more urgent. Across the city, protests erupted anew, fueled by both celebration and demand for further action. Protesters flooded the streets, their chants echoing through neighborhoods and drawing attention to the enduring struggle for equality. "No justice, no peace," they roared, holding banners aloft under the fading sunlight. Some carried megaphones, urging passers-by to join the movement. Others handed out flyers detailing demands for broader reforms within law enforcement body cams, independent oversight boards, de-escalation training. Their voices were loud, insistent, refusing to let the momentum fade. To Amir, standing at the edge of the crowd, their determination was both inspiring and sobering. They reminded him that this fight belonged to all of them, not just him. As night fell, casting long shadows across the courthouse plaza, Amir found himself alone amidst the lingering energy of the day. The crowd had thinned, but remnants of protest signs and candles flickered softly in the breeze. He stared at the horizon, where streaks of orange and purple painted the sky, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. Justice had been served in his case, but he knew the road ahead would be long, fraught with challenges yet unseen. Still, uncertainty didn't weaken his resolve. It hardened it. With a deep breath, Amir straightened, his jaw set with renewed purpose. Whatever came next, he vowed to keep pushing forward, for himself, for his community, and for generations to come. Amir sat alone on the porch of his childhood home, the quiet hum of cicadas filling the evening air. The trial was over, the verdict delivered, but the weight of everything he'd endured lingered heavily in his chest. He replayed moments from the past few months. The confrontation with Officer Brennan, the late nights poring over documents with Sarah, the protests that had turned streets into rivers of voices demanding change. Each memory carried its own ache, yet together they painted a picture of growth. He wasn't the same man who had stepped out of his car that day. Adversity had shaped him, sharpened him, and given him a clarity he hadn't known before. As days passed, Amir began to notice something remarkable happening around him. Strangers approached him at community meetings or sent messages online, sharing their own stories of injustice. A young woman recounted being pulled over repeatedly for no reason other than her race. An elderly man spoke of watching his son face similar treatment decades ago. These encounters reminded Amir that his fight hadn't been just about himself. It had become a catalyst for others to find their voices. Realizing this ignited a fire within him. If his pain could inspire even one person to stand up, then every struggle had been worth it. With renewed purpose, Amir threw himself into crafting solutions. He partnered with lawmakers, attending hearings and drafting legislation aimed at increasing transparency within law enforcement. His first-hand experience gave him credibility, and his passion made him impossible to ignore. At first, navigating the political landscape felt daunting. Negotiations were slow, compromises frustrating, but Amir refused to let bureaucracy dull his resolve. Every policy proposal, every line of legislation, was a step toward dismantling the system that had wronged so many. The national spotlight soon found him. News outlets picked up his story, framing him as a symbol of resilience and reform. Interviews followed, each one an opportunity to amplify the message. Systemic racism needed to be addressed head-on. But with attention came pressure. Critics questioned his motives, while supporters looked to him for answers he sometimes didn't have. Still, Amir embraced the responsibility, knowing his platform could push the conversation forward. Late nights spent strategizing became a testament to his commitment, not just to justice, but to those counting on him to lead the way. By the time autumn arrived, painting trees in hues of gold and crimson, Amir had made peace with the sacrifices ahead. True justice wouldn't come overnight, but he envisioned a future where no child grew up fearing the badge meant to protect them, where no parent had to bury their child because of prejudice masquerading as authority. This vision fueled him, driving him forward despite the challenges. Amir knew his work would outlast him, a legacy etched not in stone, but in lives transformed by courage and collective action. And for him, there was no greater purpose. Amir stood at the edge of a park where hundreds had gathered, their faces illuminated by candlelight during what had once been a vigil, but now felt like something more, a call to action. The air buzzed with purpose as conversations turned from shared grief to shared solutions. What began as protests and vigils evolved into workshops on civic engagement, policy discussions about reform, and even training sessions led by activists teaching de-escalation tactics. Amir watched as neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now sat side by side, brainstorming ways to heal divisions that had fractured their community for too long. The energy shifted further when outrage transformed into organized effort. Community leaders hosted town halls, inviting not just residents but also law enforcement officials willing to listen. At first, tensions ran high. Some officers bristled under scrutiny, while community members remained skeptical of empty promises. But slowly, dialogue replaced distrust. Residents proposed actionable changes: mandatory body cameras, independent oversight boards, and regular diversity. Training for police. Amir found himself in the middle of it all, bridging gaps and urging both sides to stay committed to progress. It wasn't easy, but momentum built steadily as small victories paved the way for larger ones. Decatur became a beacon of hope when city officials formally adopted groundbreaking reforms. Mandatory body cams ensured transparency, independent oversight boards held officers accountable, and de-escalation training equipped law enforcement with tools to prevent unnecessary conflict. For the first time in decades, trust began to rebuild between the community and police. Officers attended neighborhood meetings, listening rather than dictating, while residents offered feedback without fear of retaliation. These measures weren't perfect, but they were steps toward lasting change, and everyone could see the difference. Word of Decatur's success spread quickly, drawing national attention. Journalists arrived to document the transformation, and soon other cities followed suit. Towns across the country looked to Decatur as a model, adopting similar policies and adapting them to fit local needs. Activists praised the collaboration, calling it a blueprint for addressing systemic racism within policing systems nationwide. Amir received messages from strangers thanking him for inspiring movements in their own communities. Each story reinforced his belief that collective action could ripple far beyond one city or one case. As winter gave way to spring, Amir walked through the same streets where protests had once echoed with chants of anger and despair. Now, murals painted by local artists depicted unity and resilience, vibrant colors breathing life into walls that had once seemed cold and indifferent. Bridges were being rebuilt, not just between individuals but within the fabric of the community itself. Amir paused near a group of children playing tag, their laughter carrying on the breeze. In their joy, he saw hope blooming, a reminder that transformation was possible when people rose together. Together, they were leaving behind a legacy of courage, proving that even the deepest wounds could heal with time, effort, and unwavering solidarity. Amir sat in a brightly lit classroom, surrounded by eager faces leaning forward in their seats. The students were a mix of ages and backgrounds, but they shared one thing: a hunger to understand how they could make a difference. Amir's voice carried both passion and patience as he spoke about civil rights, the importance of knowing your rights, and the power of speaking up against injustice. "You have a voice," he told them, his tone firm yet encouraging. "And when you use it, people listen." He saw the spark ignite in their eyes, the moment they realized their potential to create change. Determined to turn inspiration into opportunity, Amir launched a scholarship program aimed at supporting students pursuing careers in law and public service. The initiative was more than financial aid. It was a lifeline for young people who might otherwise be shut out of these fields due to systemic barriers. At the inaugural award ceremony, Amir stood beside the first recipients, each of whom had written essays detailing their dreams of creating a fairer world. As he handed over the certificates, Amir felt a surge of pride. These students weren't just beneficiaries. They were future leaders, ready to carry the torch. Through partnerships with local schools and community organizations, Amir expanded his efforts beyond mentorship to include comprehensive civic education programs. Workshops taught students how the government worked, how policies were shaped, and most importantly, how they could influence those processes. Role-playing exercises allowed them to practice activism, from organizing mock protests to drafting petitions. Teachers reported seeing newfound confidence in their students, many of whom began initiating conversations about inequality and justice among their peers. Civic engagement was no longer an abstract concept. It was alive and tangible. As the programs gained traction, their impact rippled outward. Students started youth-led initiatives, tackling issues like racial profiling, educational inequity, and voter suppression. One group organized a town hall meeting that drew hundreds, while another launched a social media campaign highlighting stories of injustice in their community. Watching these young advocates step into leadership roles filled Amir with awe. They proved what he'd always believed. Real change began when people understood their power and acted on it. Their energy was contagious, breathing life into movements that had once seemed stagnant. Years later, as Amir stood on the steps of a courthouse watching a new generation of activists rally for justice, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. These young leaders, some of whom he'd mentored personally, others inspired indirectly by his work, were carrying the fight forward. Their voices rang out, strong and clear, echoing the lessons he'd worked so hard to impart. Amir smiled softly, knowing his legacy wasn't tied to any single victory or policy, but to the countless lives he'd touched. By equipping others with the tools for change, he ensured that the struggle for justice would endure long after he was gone. A testament to hope, action, and the unstoppable force of empowered youth. Amir stood at the edge of a sprawling park, now transformed into a vibrant hub of celebration. The air buzzed with laughter, applause, and snippets of conversation as people from all walks of life gathered to honor the progress made since his case had sparked a movement. A stage was set up beneath a canopy of string lights, where speakers took turns sharing their stories of resilience, courage, and collective effort. Activists recounted late-night strategy sessions. Educators spoke of classrooms buzzing with discussions about justice. Community members shared how they'd found their voices in marches and meetings. Each story wove together a tapestry of unity, reminding everyone that meaningful change required more than one person. It demanded a chorus. As Amir listened to the speakers, he felt the weight of what they'd accomplished, but also the enormity of what still lay ahead. When it was his turn to take the stage, the crowd fell silent, their eyes fixed on him with a mix of admiration and anticipation. He began by acknowledging the strides they'd made. Policy reforms, restored trust between communities and law enforcement, and a generation of young leaders stepping boldly into advocacy. But then his tone shifted, becoming urgent yet hopeful. "We've come far," he said, his voice steady but charged with emotion. "But let's not confuse progress with victory. This fight isn't over. Not until every child can walk down the street without fear. Not until justice is blind to race." His words resonated deeply, drawing murmurs of agreement from the audience. As Amir continued, he painted a vivid picture of the future they were striving for. A world where systemic racism no longer dictated lives or opportunities. He described classrooms where diversity wasn't just tolerated but celebrated, neighborhoods where police served as partners rather than adversaries, and workplaces where talent outweighed prejudice. His vision wasn't abstract. It was tangible, rooted in the actions they could take today to shape tomorrow. Tears glistened in some eyes, while others nodded fiercely, recommitting themselves to the cause. As the event drew to a close, Amir stepped off the stage and walked through the dispersing crowd. Families packed up blankets, children chased fireflies, and friends lingered, exchanging ideas for next steps. The energy was electric, infused with both gratitude and determination. Amir paused near a group of teenagers who were passionately discussing ways to expand their youth-led initiatives. Their enthusiasm reminded him that this movement wasn't confined to one moment or one generation. It was a living, breathing force that would endure as long as there were people willing to nurture it. Standing under the fading glow of string lights, Amir allowed himself a small smile. Hope wasn't fleeting. It was enduring. It thrived in the hearts of those who refused to settle, who understood that lasting change required sustained effort. As the night deepened and the park emptied, Amir felt a renewed sense of purpose. The seeds of justice had been planted, and though the road ahead would be long, he knew they would continue to grow through collective action, unwavering resilience, and an unshakable belief in a better future. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful narratives that inspire change. Glowing star backhand index pointing right, hit the like button if you believe in the power of justice and equality. Backhand index pointing right, share this video with friends and family to spread awareness and spark conversations. Backhand index pointing right, subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story that challenges perspectives and fuels hope. Together, we can create a community that stands for truth, empowerment, and lasting change. Flex biceps bell, turn on notifications so you're always updated when we release new content. Thank you for being part of this journey. Your support helps amplify voices that matter. Let's keep building a better future, one story at a time.